Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tudohoyan. This morning I would like to look at the narrative of Docket 636. The docket that is unfolding in the Pretoria High Court by way of evidence led by the prosecution. The most important thing I would like to address this morning is what Gininda told the Pretoria High Court, that this was a prosecution-driven investigation. That is very important because a prosecution-driven investigation takes the form of the police undertaking an investigation, acting closely with the prosecution as they undertake that investigation. But crucially, it is the prosecution that will then take the final decision of who must be charged. And as they go about gathering evidence, the police will from time to time then be in consultation with the prosecution and get guidance from the prosecution in terms of where the investigation should go, so that the prosecution builds a prosecutable case in court when the matter finally comes up in court. That is how a prosecution-driven investigation looks like, or how it is conducted. So in this matter, in the sense of MEYIWA trial, what does it all mean? It means that whatever Gininda and the other investigators, Mohola, Buthelezi, and all of them, were doing was done under the watch and the guidance of the prosecution. Now, the face of the prosecution here is Advocate George Baloyi. So that in that sort of scenario, what Gininda does is directly attributable to what Baloyi does. In other words, you cannot separate Baloyi and Gininda because they were in this together. The decision, for instance, not to prosecute or to arrest and prosecute Kelly Kumar, in spite of the fact that Gininda has fingered her as the mastermind in the killing of Senzo MEYIWA, because this was a prosecution-driven investigation, the prosecution took the decision that Kelly Kumalo must not be arrested. Now, let us come back to the recent developments that we have just seen in court. So, as part of that prosecution-driven investigation, one of the key witnesses, or the first key witness in that kind of scenario, was supposed to be Absalom Zungu. So Gininda went about trying to solicit the evidence of Absalom Zungu to the effect that he had overheard a conversation at the Basotho hostel, or had heard from somebody else, Mbekiseni Zungu, about this conversation between the accused persons relating to the death of Senzo MEYIWA. So that was how the prosecution approached the Zungu affair. So they tried to persuade Absalom Zungu to come and testify, in spite of the fact that they knew very well that Absalom Zungu had nothing to do or knew nothing about the killing of Senzo MEYIWA. So a plot was then hatched in view of the fact that Absalom Zungu was not willing to come forward to testify for the prosecution. A plan was then hatched to bolster this prosecution-driven investigation. A plot was hatched to forge an affidavit and to forge a signature purportedly made by Absalom Zungu, and to take that affidavit, that forged affidavit, and put it before the Pretoria High Court. And this was done by Gininda with the tacit approval of Advocate George Baloyi, with the connivance of Advocate George Baloyi in this prosecution-led investigation. Everything does not seem to have gone very well because Absalom Zungu turned down the prosecution. But they then went ahead, nevertheless, to come up with this forged affidavit purportedly attested to by Absalom Zungu and put it before the Pretoria High Court as Exhibit UU. That is how the narrative of 636, the prosecution-led investigation, is unfolding in the Pretoria High Court. So, with the testimony of Absalom Zungu for the defense, remember, because the prosecution had to abandon him, because he would not have anything to do with the illegal intentions that they had of coming up with false evidence to falsely implicate the accused persons in the death of Senzo MEYIWA. That is Docket 636 for you. So, in spite of the fact that Absalom Zungu was not coming forward, the only option they had was to forge his signature, forge an affidavit, and put it before the Pretoria High Court as evidence. Absalom Zungu has completely rubbished that evidence. The second leg of that prosecution-led investigation took the form of coming up again with false evidence about what transpired at the Basotho hostel on the 26th of October 2014 when Zungu Jr., Constable Zungu, told the Pretoria High Court how he had met the accused persons at the Basotho hostel on the day that Senzo MEYIWA was killed. That too, that leg of the prosecution-driven investigation has also proved to be false. Because the idea, remember Gininda met with Gwabeni at least 2 or 3 times. And on each occasion, Gwabeni turned down his proposal that it would come before court to give false testimony. This was also still a prosecution-led investigation. And indeed, at some stage, Gwabeni has testified before the Pretoria High Court. that he was assaulted in the presence of Advocate George Baloyi. So all this was a prosecution. The underlying theme here is that it was a prosecution-driven investigation. Gininda, as the lead investigator that he calls himself, was in touch with the prosecution throughout that investigation, so that whatever has happened to Absalom Zungu and whatever has happened to Gwabeni, Baloyi is complicit in it, because the investigators were acting with the connivance of the prosecution in all these grand, unfortunate schemes. So this is the nature of 636. This is how Docket 636, or what Docket 636 is proving to be before the Pretoria High Court. The narrative has shifted completely. All that we are left with now is to see more witnesses come before the Pretoria High Court to expose the lie of 636. And Absalom Zungu and Gwabeni have gone a long way to do that. They have set the scene, and all that forthcoming witnesses will have to do is just simply corroborate this forgery, this grand plan to forge evidence. Because some of us have always said, this docket is fictitious, basing ourselves on the testing, on the evidence that we have gathered from some of the investigators who were involved in this matter, who took quite a contrary view and came up with Docket 375, which says there were no intruders into that house. So Judge Rata seems to have been fixated on believing the narrative of 636 and does not seem to be coming to terms with the testimonies of people like Absalom Zungu and Gwabeni, which are unsettling him. That is how the Senzo MEYIWA trial is panning out in the Pretoria High Court. It is proving to be a complete forgery undertaken by the investigators with the prosecution complicit in all this. Having said that, let me thank you for watching this video. Let me thank you for all the likes and subscriptions that I'm seeing. And have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.